All right. I'm here with Sang Lee, CEO of DarcMatter, and now currently the project Constellation. Thank you for being with us at Token Post. We were interviewed you last year, I think, towards July.
Right.
We're glad to be here. We have a lot of questions for you. I think there's a lot of updates since last time.
Yep, for sure.
So just to go over some of your things that you're doing at DarcMatter,
Yep.
You just launched Dark Wallet
Yes.
on July 1st.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about DarcMatter
Okay.
shortly and about Constellation?
Sure. So DarcMatter is a fintech platform that's headquartered in New York with offices also in Ukraine, Shanghai, and Seoul. We focus on the alternative asset space to streamline the fundraising process for venture capital funds, private equity funds, and hedge funds. And then we provide access to those products to investors all around the world. And to tie that back to Dark Wallet a bit, as you mentioned, Constellation is a new company that was formed under DarcMatter to create a blockchain infrastructure for all of financial services. Right now, DarcMatter is running as a centralized platform where our company is the clearinghouse for these new products. We think there is a future to tie in all of these services via blockchain technology, provide self-incentivization, and Dark Wallet is the means to interact with this new infrastructure. So they can use our token, which is DARC Dark, in order to stake their tokens to provide new financial products or new services and also generate new revenue streams in the future, as opposed to just providing technology infrastructure like we've seen in the past.
So you mentioned about some of the service providers, and you told me earlier about that through Constellations, the service providers could be their own nodes. Can you tell us maybe some examples of services and why you think they should be on Constellation?
Sure, absolutely. So even if you think about financial services today, right? When you buy a stock from a bank or you deposit money into a bank, it seems very easy, but in actuality, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. There's a massive global infrastructure that allows you to take out money with your ATM card from the United States, and they connect seamlessly through the back end, right? But these connections are very linear and they're very, very expensive. And there's no incentive also for them to just stop sending money to you, right? That's just a contractual obligation. But under Constellation, what we think is that these service providers can actually plug in so that customers have more choice and more power in how the system is actually run. So there's an incentive to kick out bad actors, for example, or folks that are not efficient in running the system. And just to mention a few of these services, let's think about custody. So one of the hottest topics right now in the industry is tokenization of assets or securities. It's a sexy topic, but in actuality, it's very difficult to do because no one knows how to hold it. You can't hold a certificate. You can't put a token in your pocket. So people are very worried, how do I keep this secure? How do I not lose it? What the heck is a private key, for example? So people are asking for custody solutions, but custody solutions are fragmented right now. You have to go to the custodian and then somehow set up a relationship so that the tokens can be shifted there. What if that becomes a part of the infrastructure like we're thinking about today, which is a blockchain-enabled infrastructure, not just software-driven, so that people are incentivized to do the best possible job, provide the best possible services, but also be incentivized to act well. We've seen in 2008, we've seen in different instances in finance, people aren't incentivized to act well. They're incentivized to take your money and run almost right now. So in a blockchain system, if we think about it the way Bitcoin works, for example, you're actually incentivized not to take the money and run because it would make the system go to zero. And that's basically what we want to build at Constellation.
So you're targeting the finance market.
Yeah.
So finance, in my opinion, goes hand in hand with the regulations, and
Correct.
rightly so.
Correct.
What are you doing at DarcMatter to overcome this, or at least work with the regulations?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think the one unique advantage we have is that DarcMatter was born of regulations. So we actually started the company by talking to regulators with the SEC, with Congress, to deregulate under what we call now the Jobs Act. So crowdfunding wasn't a thing in 2010, 2011, and we thought it was impossible. How would you deregulate private securities? How do you put things on the internet? People literally said that's illegal, we're never gonna do that ever. Now, fintech and using platforms for distribution is 100% fact. Everybody knows it's mandatory. The big asset management companies, they know they have to use the internet to reach new customers. So I think there's definitely a learning process there. I think what blockchain/cryptocurrency has a hard time understanding right now is that we all need to play nice with each other. That doesn't mean we always have to listen or we have to follow the rules of someone else. But I think there is a coordination and a cooperative effort that needs to occur. So when we talk about Bitcoin being, against government and, for the people, I think it's a great concept in theory, but for most regular people, like I said, they don't want to hold Bitcoin. They might lose it. What if you give it to somebody and you lose $100,000 worth of Bitcoin? You have nowhere to go. So you ask for a custody solution. Custody solutions will be regulated by the government. So there's always a tie back eventually. And I don't know how the regulations will evolve, but I think for us, it's much more important to be cooperative so that we can move faster than just kind of, breaking shit and moving on.
Yeah. So when it comes to finance, what part of finance is your initial target? The funds, the banking? Can you share a little bit about your focus?
So we think of the spectrum of finance that starts with payment and currency. So I think currency is actually outside of finance because currency is in the realm of pure economics and central banks and kind of macroeconomics. I think once that enters the system, which is the payment system, then it becomes a part of financial services as a currency. So if we think about the one spectrum of being payments, then I think the far end of being the most structured, complex products that hedge funds trade and banks buy, et cetera, to de-risk themselves. Where we're going to start off is where DarcMatter lives. So we think about the private fund universe, which is about $20 trillion right now, but it's very, very small compared to other asset classes. And it's the hardest to distribute. There's no way right now to distribute it seamlessly to other people. Like an investor in Thailand can't invest in a US private equity fund. It's pretty much impossible. There are regulations that says why that is, but it's more about cost really. Why does a private equity fund want to spend more money selling in Asia when they could just do it cheaper in the United States, right? So you automatically disincentivize people to act in the best interests of the community. But what if you can level that playing field a little bit, and which is what we're doing at Constellation, so that the funds can actually sell cheaper and they're incentivized to go global. Now you can democratize investor access to new products. That's just the beginning though, right? We picked the hardest one because we're gluttons for punishment. But if you think about stocks, bonds, more liquid assets, they're liquid already. They move in big exchanges, they're global. You have ADRs, et cetera, but they're still inefficient. When you IPO, you use bankers, right? Or right now there's direct listing, Slack did it. But those assets are liquid, but I think in the future they'll all be tokenized. And then you're gonna build in regulation, and it's gonna be super easy to do. So that's the spectrum that we wanna go down. The most difficult, and then start going down to the easier stuff.
Talking of finance, recently you've seen, incredible numbers in derivative trading of Bitcoin. We talked about it just earlier. BitMEX and CME, they just reached, I think, daily volume of 1.7 billion, and BitMEX tenfolds. Why is this? What's your opinion on this? Is this healthy for the industry? What should we expect from this?
Yeah. So even in traditional markets, the derivative markets are much larger than the actual notional assets. And the fact of the matter is, by nature, because it's derivative, it's much bigger because you can leverage it, you can multiply your returns or your losses very, very quickly. I think it'll only continue to grow. I think it'll only continue to grow at speeds we've never seen before, because I think we understand the derivatives market, which is funny, better than we understand Bitcoin, right? And finance people that can make derivatives market are not Bitcoiners. They're pure finance folks that are able to make these new products. And that's just kind of tongue in cheek, because I think there are products that haven't been made which are necessary for Bitcoin to succeed, ironically. So if we think about Bitcoin as an actual currency or store of value, there's no way that a sophisticated or a professional investor or even a rich investor can take a long position on that without being able to hedge it. There needs to be some mechanism by which I can hedge my risk out if it goes down. Dollar, yeah, you could probably go long, but dollar, you go long $10 billion. If you're wrong 1% on that, you're going to lose $100 million that day, right? So it's the magnitude by which this thing trades. But in the logical sense of the word, yes, long Bitcoin, forget the bankers, etc. I get it. But in the rational sense of the word, if I'm going to take a $10 million position on Bitcoin, I need to know that if this thing goes to 8 or 7, I'm hedged so that I end up with $1 million loss, for example. There aren't enough products to protect that risk right now. Yeah, you can do Bitcoin futures, but I don't know that many people that can trade futures. I barely understand the stuff myself. I mean, because it's almost like the more complex the product becomes, ironically, the easier it is to consume. And that's basically what Wall Street's really good at, right? You make a product that's easy to consume and to take a position in. Futures is not easy to take positions in. I have to track 30, 60, 90 days. I have to make sure I have enough collateral. I have to sit there and trade. If somebody creates more volatility products on top of that, which is just like an ETF, I can just buy it, like a currency ETF. I can just buy it, and I think that's why the market will continue to grow, and it's going to help adoption. There will be losses, but it's going to help adoption. And I think Asia will be the biggest consumer of derivatives, and it already is, in my opinion, and I think that's driven by the propensity for high risk, high return.
So at the moment, this volume, great volumes in the derivatives market, Bitcoin derivatives market, who are the main players there?
Yeah, so obviously CME, that's the regulated part of the world. There's also BitMEX, which is kind of sitting in a grayer area, but they've been absolutely dominating the market for Bitcoin futures, providing 100x leverage, and they did, I think, 16 billion notional in one day. They're doing absolutely, outrageous amounts of volume, but it's really driven by demand. I mean, it's not like anybody went around and said, you should do this, right? It's they thought it was a great idea, and everyone, likes to think that they're the smartest trader. But I'm sure people have been blown out, and I'm sure people have made a lot of money. Yeah, for sure. And in the beginning, I heard Arthur speak in Taiwan. People were complaining that BitMEX was a scam because people didn't realize their contracts were closing. So they wouldn't close it before the 30 days so that the whole thing would just expire. And they didn't realize that, which is why they actually made the perpetual contract. So you can just sit in there forever as long as you post collateral.
Wow. Let's talk about Libra.
Yeah.
That's the sort of the news.
Yeah.
And I think they're meeting at Washington.
Yeah.
I know you've been part of Jobs Act,
Yeah.
working on it in crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding. What are your thoughts? And some people, some conspiracy guys are saying this is all a show. What are your thoughts on Libra? What do you think the US, the government, the SEC, and governments around the world will react to this?
Yeah, I think Libra is the gorilla in the room, right? The elephant in the room right now. I think it's interesting because I do have multiple facets of thoughts about it. One being, I think it helps adoption, right? The moment it went out, people are like, what is cryptocurrency? Google, or check it on Facebook, right? So I think that's the one thing. And it's been happening to me too. My friends are like, oh,
Finally.
what's Bitcoin? Should I buy Libra first? It's like, all right. So it helped a little bit. I think having said that, I'm of the, one of my philosophies for blockchain, or anything in general really, is incentive alignment. It's not about whether I'm right or you're wrong. It's about, can we have incentives aligned so that we can cooperate?
Consensus.
Yeah, or even collude, if you think about it in a negative way, against somebody else. I think in the case of Libra, with a basket of mixed fiat-based, stablecoin currencies, that poses a huge risk to government, right? Because they're going to pick their baskets, and they're not part of the 27 nodes, etc. And there's a huge conflict of interest between those two parties. I don't know what dealings they're going to have in the back room, but if there's incentive alignment, maybe it occurs. I think ironically, the difference between the Jobs Act and this thing is it's a global fight, right? About the sovereign nations and their own tender currency. So I think that's an issue. I think from a regulatory standpoint, it will be very difficult to get done. I personally am not a huge fan that Facebook will be controlling my money. There's a great quote that I just saw because of July 4th in the United States. So Thomas Jefferson was obviously a big economics thinker, one of the earlier bankers for the United States. And he wrote in one of his earlier quotes, if private banks were ever to be able to issue, inflate and deflate their own money, and people use this, our families and their children would wake up to realize that they were homeless and broke. Wow. We can never give private banks the power to control the manufacturing and destruction of currency. And it just came to mind because of Libra, right? It's literally a private consortium of the world's most powerful companies inflating and deflating currency. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Is it unavoidable? I mean, it's inevitable, isn't it?
I think it is inevitable to a certain extent, but I think there are systems that are better designed for punishment for bad behavior. So in this case, Facebook, they only have 1% of the vote, but no one else knows how the other governance works. They may have 1%, but maybe there's triggers that makes them increase more. And who's to say they don't collude with Uber and whoever just to change the governance consensus in the future? So I think it's and who's elected Facebook and Uber? Like nobody did. So I think that's one thing. But having said that, I do believe in a semi-centralized system. I think that's the only way that this kind of plays out in a broad scale, but not for currency. I think if you think about store value or currency, right? If you think about Bitcoin as a store of value, I don't think that should be semi-centralized. I think there should always be mechanisms to decentralize as much as possible, but in reality, it's semi-centralized. We know where the mining hash power is, we know who has the most Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. But they can't change it. That's the interesting part. They can collude and do a 51% attack, but once that happens, you would never trust that system anymore. So there's kind of a natural incentive never to do that. POS is the same thing. It becomes useless if you attack it. So I think there's the way I think about the world for blockchain is that there's two layers. One layer is this pure mainnet / currency layer, which is value times technology. And that's it, right? That's the future of things, where currency becomes one and the same with technology. Then you have what we used to call the DApp layer, but I don't think that's appropriate anymore, where you put in real world services through the blockchain, where that needs to be semi-centralized. Would you want a neighborhood guy who owns a restaurant checking whether your stock is legal or not? No, absolutely not. You want a guy with a lawyer or Kim and Chang to check that this is legal to buy, and I'd be happy to do that, right? And I'm happy to pay to do that. So I think there are systems where no one should control it, especially when it's non-fungible. Like money is non-fungible. There's no reason anyone should control that. But in case of more specialized services, I think we're going to see these layers form. It's like the HTML world versus Amazon, right? Amazon is huge, but they don't control the internet. But Amazon is where you do everything, right? So I think that's similar to where we're evolving now.
Let's come back to DarcMatter.
Yeah.
So what is your goal? What's your roadmap look like in the next year, this year, next year? What are your focus? Which market? We talked about which product. Which market are you focused on, and why?
So for DarcMatter, the parent company, Korea is a very big market for us. Korea has been facing, in the most positive way, the most explosive growth we've ever seen in any other country so far. And NPS, as an example, is set to grow even further, in the next 2 years, and it's becoming a problem. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of wealth and success, where you're too successful for yourself, right? So you need to figure out ways to deploy capital to preserve wealth, and we hope to become a main catalyst in providing that service. So the financial institutions, the investors, they can find the right products to deploy into. On the roadmap for us, we're going to decentralize ourselves. So DarcMatter will become a node on Constellation, date to be announced, but we'll be one of the nodes on Constellation. And then we'll be onboarding other financial services firms, as well as platforms that provide different services, so that we can complement ourselves and provide a better suite of services through Constellation. So look forward to that, where we decentralize ourselves.
Do you have a timeline?
Within the year, for sure, but probably sooner than that.
Cool. Yeah. So, well, thank you, Sang, for joining us here at Token Post. We look forward to seeing you grow and see what you're doing in the next ventures. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sam.